As you saw at the close of episode 3, the fourth man was already inside the furnace. The God of Enoch had already crossed the gap before the soldiers ever opened the door. That answer raised another question. If God has been inside the tribulation the whole time, why has the tribulation lasted 400 years? Because of all the instruments the Watcher pattern has ever produced, the whip, the law, the red line, the algorithm, the most dangerous has always been the one that comes carrying a Bible. Before we name the false prophet, you need to know what the real one looks like. He never had an army. He never had a title from the king. He never had money. He walked into the throne room with nothing in his hands and told the man on the throne the truth. His name was Nathan. Now imagine this. He walks boldly into the palace and finds the king. He points his finger directly at him, looking him straight in the eyes and says, "Thou art the man." Well, that's exactly what Nathan did. He worked for King David, the most powerful man in Israel. David had just done two terrible things. He had taken another man's wife, and he had arranged for that man to die in battle so no one would find out. David thought he had gotten away with it. Nathan, having none of it, walked in anyway. Nathan was not alone. Amos was a shepherd. He walked into the temple at Bethel and told the priest the king's whole house was about to fall. Jeremiah was barely more than a boy. He stood in front of the gates of Jerusalem and told the kings of Judah their city would burn. Isaiah walked through the streets in sackcloth for 3 years to show the people what was coming. None of them had an army. None of them had a title. None of them were paid. They walked in anyway. That is the tradition you come from. Most people assume the slave trade started in America in 1619, with 20 captives stepping off a ship in Virginia. That's not when it started. That's not how it happened. By the time those 20 people reached Virginia, the machine that put them on the ship had already been running for almost 200 years. It all started in 1441. A small group of Portuguese sailors landed on the west coast of Africa. They were not soldiers. They were not an army. They were a few men with a boat, looking for gold. They did not find any gold. So they took people instead. Brought them back to Portugal, terrified, against their will, sold them as property, and went out again, deliberately, as hunters of people. The next time they came back, they took more. And the time after that, more still. And the time after that, and the time after that. By 1444, only 3 years later, they held a public auction in the town square at Lagos, Portugal. 235 human beings, sold in front of a crowd, in broad daylight, while the town watched. Prince Henry of Portugal himself rode through the square on horseback. He was given his share of the captives as a gift. And here, in the middle of that square, the second beast showed up for the first time. Not in a robe, not yet. He stood in a long white surplice, with a cross around his neck and a Bible in his hand. A priest of the Catholic Church. Think of it. He was not there out of outrage to condemn. He was there to sanctify the unholy. He walked among the captives before they were sold, poured water on their foreheads, spoke Latin over them, baptized them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. And then, to make absolutely certain that the empire, those in authority, had cover, the Pope himself sanctioned it by signing his name to it. Twice. In 1452, Pope Nicholas V wrote a letter to the King of Portugal. He gave the king permission, in writing, with the seal of Rome, to seize the lands and the people of any non-Christian nation he could reach, to take them as property, forever. 3 years later, he wrote it again, just to erase any doubt. Are you watching this? The man who claimed to speak for Christ on earth put his name on it and handed it to all the kings of Europe. That's how it was formalized. That's when the money really started rolling in. And it was not just the Pope's signature. The Catholic Church itself, through the Jesuit order, became one of the largest slaveholders in the Americas. By the 1760s, the Jesuits owned more than 20,000 enslaved people. In 1838, they sold 272 of them at once to save Georgetown University from bankruptcy. The institution that signed the bulls was also the institution holding the chains. Are you seeing this? Now you know why they have not apologized. Blood is dripping from their hands too. And it did roll in. Within a generation, the Portuguese had built a fortress on the coast of West Africa. Stone walls, iron gates, a holding cell carved into the rock big enough for hundreds of human beings at a time. They called it El Mina, the mine. That is what they called the people they were taking. Or, from El Mina, the ships started moving south, then west, then across the ocean to a continent the Europeans had only just learned existed. In 1526, almost 100 years before the first ship reached Virginia, the Portuguese delivered the first cargo of African captives to the Americas. Just take a moment and feel the scale and weight of this thing. This monstrous money-making machine was now international in its scope. And on every ship, at the captain's table, sat the chaplain. He prayed over the voyage before it left the harbor. He read scripture in the captain's cabin every Sunday. And when the captives died in the hold, and they died by the hundreds, he wrote their deaths into the ship's log and asked God's blessing on the crew. Many of them did not die from disease. The ship surgeons had a name for what was killing them. They called it fixed melancholy. The Portuguese called it banzo, a longing for home so deep that the body simply shut down. Some of the captives stopped eating. Some refused water. Some walked to the rail when they were brought up on deck and threw themselves into the ocean. Some just lay in the hold and decided they were done. They were not defective cargo. Think of it. They were human beings. And the part of them that the captors could not reach refused to keep living inside what was being done to them. Some of them survived. Some of them did not. But the captors did not touch what God had put in them before the chains ever came on. They could log the deaths. They could throw the bodies overboard. They could not reach the someone. Separated from identity, separated from family, separated from community, separated from heritage, and worst of all, separated from love and from the God-given right to choose. And the chaplain, unfazed, doing what is now customary, blessing evil. And then the ships came to America. And the second beast came with them. By the time the first 20 captives stepped off that ship in Virginia in 1619, the machine that put them there was 178 years old. Almost 2 centuries of practice. Almost 2 centuries of papal cover. Almost 2 centuries of linguisters, captive Africans, groomed by the captains, taught the captains theology, and used to deliver it to the rest of the hold in a language they understood. Almost 2 centuries of chaplains saying grace at captains' tables while human beings died in the hold below them. America did not invent any of this. America inherited it, already mature, already blessed, already industrial, and made it bigger. So much bigger, in fact, that 2 million human beings died on the voyage itself. And when a historian named Walter Rodney looked at the centuries of stolen generations, he put the total loss to Africa at up to 100 million people. In 1808, the United States banned the international slave trade, while domestic slavery continued for another 57 years. And in 1865, the 13th Amendment abolished slavery, except for one loophole. Slavery shall not exist in the United States, except as a punishment for crime. Read that again. Except as a punishment for crime. That loophole did not close anything. It changed the lock. It said, you can still hold human beings as property. You just have to call them prisoners first. The Catholic Church never apologized. Nor did the Pope. That's what you have to understand about the second beast. He does not retire. He does not retreat. He does not admit wrongdoing. He sanctifies evil. He is in the military briefing room. In rooms across every branch of the United States Armed Forces, on installations spread across the Middle East, commanders are standing in front of their troops right now and telling them that the wars they are being sent to fight are part of God's plan. Not allowed by God. Not permitted by God. Required by God. They are telling young people that the president has been anointed by Jesus to start the war that triggers Armageddon and brings about the return of Christ. More than 200 complaints have been filed by service members across 13 installations. Every branch, every rank, every faith, including Christians. One officer described the briefing this way. The commander stood in front of the unit, cited the book of Revelation, told the troops not to be afraid, and had a wide grin on his face when he said it. And he is not standing alone. The current defense secretary, the man who runs the Pentagon, has built mandatory Christian prayer services into the building itself. His personal Bible study leader spends his time teaching cabinet officials and members of Congress that God blesses America's military allies and curses its enemies. The current administration has not separated itself from this theology. It has built its foreign policy around it. That is the same theology, exactly, that the chaplain spoke over the captives in 1444. That God blesses the powerful, that God curses the ones the powerful have chosen to crush, that the violence about to be done is holy. Different room, different century, different uniform. Same sermon. Now widen the picture. Since 1948, the year the modern state of Israel was founded, the United States has sent more than $300 billion in aid to that nation. Across 75 years. Across 14 administrations, across both political parties. The United States has used its Security Council veto more than 50 times to block resolutions critical of that same nation. More than every other council member combined. That is not a policy. That is a covenant. And the theology underneath it, the theology that calls one nation God's chosen instrument and casts every other nation in the region as the enemy of God, has been preached from American pulpits, written into American foreign policy, and taught in American military academies for 3 generations. The second beast did not stay in the briefing room. He helped write the foreign policy. And on March 25, 2026, 53 nations stood up at the United Nations and refused to vote. The General Assembly had been asked to formally name the transatlantic slave trade as the gravest crime against humanity. A simple recognition, a vote of conscience. 53 nations chose silence. Now look at who they were. Every member of the European Union, the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia. The same nations whose kings received the papal bulls in 1452 and 1455. The same nations whose ships sailed out of European ports for 4 centuries hunting people. The same nations whose ports got rich on the cargo their fathers brought back. They did not vote no. They did not vote yes either. They abstained because they know what an honest vote would have to admit. Blood is on their hands, and they cannot say so out loud, because once they say so out loud, the next question becomes impossible to ignore. What are you going to do about it? They said the wording was too strong. They said the legal language about reparations was inconvenient. They said the word gravest implied a hierarchy among atrocities. Centuries after 1441, and the descendants of the nations that built the machine still could not bring themselves to publicly admit they were the initial perpetrators of the largest scale of structural evil. Don't be deceived. The second beast, still in the cabinet, still in the foreign ministry, still in the diplomatic seat, is not about to open the door of returning all that was stolen. Where is Nathan? He is closer than you think. Because the prophet never arrives when the king expects him. He does not announce himself at the gate. He does not send word. He does not request an audience. He walks in. And here is what you have to understand about when he walks in. The 53 nations that abstained at the United Nations did not abstain because they had nothing to say. They abstained because they had convinced themselves no one would ever force them to say it. That silence, that exact silence, is what Nathan walks into. The prophet does not arrive when the empire is afraid. He arrives when the empire is certain. Certain it has buried the truth deep enough. Certain it has held the door shut long enough. Certain that the silence has become permanent. That is the signal. Not weakness in the empire. Confidence. And the empire has never been more confident than it is right now. And the prophet does not arrive with an army. He does not arrive with money. He does not arrive with a title. He does not arrive with the backing of any government, any institution, any approved coalition. He arrives with nothing in his hands, except the truth. Think back to the captives in the hold. Some of them survived, some of them did not. And for the ones who survived, the someone in them walked off the ship. It walked into every generation that came after. It is walking right now, in you, hearing this. For the ones who did not survive, the someone in them did not stop being someone. It crossed into a realm the captors had no access to, where it is kept, where it is recorded, where it is waiting for delivery, restoration, and renewal. That is the witness the prophet carries when he walks in. He is not arriving for the survivors only. He is arriving for the entire someone, the part of every captive that the system could never reach, the living and the buried, the marked and the unmarked, the ones whose names were recorded and the ones whose names the captors threw away. All of them. Still real. Still on the list. Still inside the covenant. That is the fragment that walks in, empty-handed, with the witness of everyone the empire ever tried to erase. That is what makes the empty hands so heavy. They are not actually empty at all. They are carrying the entire ledger the captors thought they had destroyed. And the prophet does not stop at the gate. He walks past the guards, past every officer of the empire whose job is to keep the door of the throne room closed. And he opens the door of the sanctuary itself. That is where the judgment begins. Not in the streets, not in the courts, not even at the throne first. At the sanctuary. The room where the institution worships its own image. The room where the bulls were signed. The room where the chaplain still says grace. That is the room the prophet enters first. Begin at my sanctuary, the Lord said to Ezekiel. Because the empire cannot be confronted from outside, the empire has to be confronted at the altar it built for itself. Here is the part the institution has never understood about its own image. The painting in the sanctuary is not the record. The carved name on the cornerstone is not the record. The bound volumes in the archive are not the record. Those are the institution's image of itself. The real record has been kept by someone whose pen the institution cannot break, in a ledger the institution cannot read, by a witness the institution has never been able to silence. Every ship, every auction, every baptism on the deck, every grace said over dinner, every paper signed, every wallet flagged, every algorithm trained, every briefing room, every abstention, logged in the real ledger by the witness who has never been off duty. And the prophet, the empty-handed one carrying the entire history the empire tried to throw overboard, does not have to argue the case in the sanctuary. He only has to open the ledger. Are you ready to see clearly? The reason the institution has been able to operate for over 400 years without consequence is not because the case has not been made. The case was made when the choice was made, in every generation, by every prophet who walked in. What has been missing is the audience. The empire's confidence has always depended on one thing: that the people the system was built against would never recognize what they were looking at, that they would mistake the chaplain for a holy man, that they would mistake the abstention for neutrality, that they would mistake the silence for the end of the story. You now know better. You have walked through the descent. You have seen the papal bulls. You have seen the Jesuit chains. You have seen the chaplain at the captain's table. You have seen the loophole. You have seen the cabinet, the foreign ministry, the diplomatic seat. You have seen the second beast in every uniform he has ever worn. That recognition is not small. That recognition is what the empire has worked the hardest to prevent. The prophet walks in with empty hands, and you, at this very moment, have the eyes that can see what is in them. And here is what no empire has ever been able to prepare for. The prophet has always been one. Nathan was one. Amos was one. Jeremiah was one. But the people the prophet was walking in for, the people the case was being made for, have never been one. They are many, and every one of them is on the ledger. The prophet walks in alone. The ledger he carries does not. That is the witness the sanctuary cannot answer. That is the case the empire has worked 4 centuries to prevent, the audience from being able to see so they can read. And that is the moment of revelation. You, reading the ledger. Now.